So I'm talking to Kate, and you work for The Egg, which produces work for young audiences. And you, at the moment, you're producing a lot of work for the very youngest audiences, kids who haven't even started school yet. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on, as a playwright, how do you write for kids that young who might not even have that great sense of language?
Well, I mean, I'm not a playwright. I'm a producer. So I'm not going to give a very academic kind of answer to this question. But the way that we approach making work for a young audience and for a very young audience is that we see children as having, we're very inspired by a poem by Loris Malaguzzi, which is called 100 Languages of Children. And so we think of children as having 100 different languages with which they communicate with the world, with which they communicate with themselves, with which they explore the world. So as adults, we can fall into the trap of being quite head-based, quite word-led, quite text-led, and particularly in the theatre industry, we can sometimes fall foul of being driven by the text and bringing all the other languages in after that. And so I think what we do in our world is try and sort of mix all those things together. So spoken language is one of the very important things that you use, but it's at that age it's more poetic, it's more impressionistic, it's more musical, and doesn't need to have so much meaning. But I always think about what you do need is you do need a script. You do need a structure, because my feeling is that the best dramaturgs in the world are children, because they're the first ones who. So you and I as adults have a kind of politeness about us when we watch a show, because you will have experienced that thing where you suddenly realise for the last 5 minutes you weren't concentrating. And I don't know about you, I always blame myself, and then afterwards I think, no, that's not my fault that I wasn't concentrating. Something happened in the play there, and it sort of dipped, and whatever it is about the dramaturgical structure became weaker. And for those few minutes, I quietly and politely and invisibly drifted off. But of course, what a child does, it does all of those things, but it does it very visibly. It's particularly a baby. So I think that what an artist or a playwright or an author, I mean, I've started calling people who make work for babies authors. I don't know why, but it just seems to make sense to me. They conceive an idea and they kind of author it and they give it shape and structure. So I think what they're looking at is... I lost my thread there, but that's okay. I went on for a while. Yeah,
wonderful. It's about creating structure.
It's about creating structure, and so people who make work for a young audience tend to, rightly or wrongly, probably rightly, work closely with children at various stages along the process. So some people feel it's very important to work with children before they even start making their structure. Other people say that could be a dilution of your artistic voice and it becomes a bit of a democratic process and la-di-da-di-da. So maybe that's not the best time to consult with children, but at various key stages along the way in your process, it's good to check in with your audience, as it is for any piece. You check in, you do scratch performances, you try it in front of your friends, whatever. So it will be tried out on those children, and those children and their attention span and the moments in which you see them engaged and the moments in which you see that they're disengaged is what tells you what you need to know about the dramaturgical structure of your piece.
These authors that you work with, do they work alone as a kind of on creating, or is it a team?
It's very, very collaborative. So I mean, it's devised theatre. Children's theatre is very, very often devised theatre, and people do write plays for a young audience, and I've seen some plays that have been scripted for an early years audience. So it starts with a script. A writer goes away on their own, writes a script in the good old-fashioned way. Director comes along, designer comes along, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and they follow the same path. And that can work. And I think more and more, actually, people are trying that out now. They sort of threw it out very early on, and now they're saying, well, let's revisit that and see if we can do that. But generally speaking, and most of the work that I've been around is very collaborative. So your author, director, theatre maker, whatever you want to call them, but the person who's leading on the vision will bring together their team. And their team, so I'm working on a piece for babies at the moment called 16 Singers, and her closest ally is her composer. And she used as her stimulus for 16 Singers a poem by Caroline Duffy about bees, and she's very interested in the visualization of breath as it comes out of the human body and as it is drawn into the human body, and how that makes sound, and so how therefore we don't just hear sound, we can see sound as well. And so she works with her composer very, very closely, as a director would work with a designer, for example, very, very closely to conceptualize every second of the play as it's going to end up being. And then the composer does what the composer does. He writes according to that brief. And then she then also worked with a choreographer and a designer.
Wonderful. You also have do work for another age bracket, and you work for kids that are a little bit older, school kids, teenagers, and so on.
Yeah.
And you were saying earlier that these kids want to make theatre. They're often in the plays as much as wanting to watch them. Again, focusing on the process of the writer, do you think there's anything particular that a writer needs to keep in mind when writing for young performers, writing plays that are to be performed by children?
I think it's a bit of a gift, actually, giving that brief to a writer, because you're nearly always saying to them, it's a big cast, which is a gift for a jobbing writer, as it were, to be able to write for many voices and many characters and a kind of complex interrelationships on stage. And I don't think the brief is very different than some of the work we've been looking at this afternoon, which is specifically for a young audience, which is about making the work relevant and necessary for the young people who are going to be presenting the work, today. So it needs to be good, obviously, like any work of art needs to be good, it needs to be well crafted, it needs to have some relevance, but quite a lot of things are relevant to teenagers as they are to you and me, so that's a broad church. And my other feeling is that it needs to feel very, very necessary, because I think children are, young people and teenagers have got lots and lots of distractions, they're flitting around, they're really, really into their social lives, they're really into their friendships, never more so than now, when they can have those friendships 24/7 through their handheld devices. And so what the plays now need to do is they need to say something that none of that can say. It needs to have this extraordinary sense of urgency. So if and when I'm working with that age group, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something really, really urgent, really necessary right now. My God, we've got to do this now. We've got to hurry up.
In terms of, you were saying, you can look at complex relationship, where there can be many characters, but are you at all worried that if the characters themselves become too complex, that it becomes too difficult for young actors or untrained actors, for children to deal with, to understand the characters? Would you say that a playwright would need to simplify characters, or would you encourage the same complexity that you would for professional actors?
I don't think so. I don't think there's any intellectual inferiority about teenagers. I think that they have less experience of the world, they've met less things, they've experienced less things, but I think intellectually they're better than me. So no, I don't think so. And I think that it's key that you've got a good creative team in place, so you've got a director who can unpick it, and access to the writer is fabulous, so they can work with the writer and the motivation of the writing. And just unpick it very, very slowly. And when you work with a young cast, you have that gift, you have that luxury, don't you, of working. You don't have like a 3-week rehearsal period and then on stage. You kind of weekly, week after week after week, sometimes for a whole term, you get a chance to really sleep on it and work on it. So,
Wonderful. Thank you very much.